Mr. Pendergrass will open the briefing with an overview of OSHA's findings in this investigation. Mr. Pendergrass will be joined during the question and answer session by Frank White, OSHA's Deputy Assistant Secretary, and by John Miles, who is OSHA's Regional Administrator in Boston, the office that was in charge of this investigation at the L Ambiance Plaza. John Pendergrass, OSHA's Assistant Secretary.
Thank you, Terry. Good morning. I would like at this time to introduce the 4 congressmen from Connecticut who are here at this conference. The Honorable Bruce Morrison, the Honorable John Rowland, the Honorable Chris Shays, the Honorable Nancy Johnson. Thank you for attending. The purpose of this news conference is to release the findings and conclusions of OSHA's investigation of the collapse of the L Ambiance Plaza apartment complex on April the 23rd of this year. The news conference is being broadcast simultaneously by satellite to the Bridgeport City's council chambers, where community leaders have gathered to hear firsthand the results of our investigations. I want to express my appreciation to the people of Bridgeport for their assistance and cooperation in this investigation, and for their patience in awaiting this report. OSHA is also grateful to the invaluable assistance of Connecticut State Police men and women who helped gather essential facts throughout the course of our investigation. To the families and fellow workers of the 28 men who died in this accident, I want to express my deepest sympathies for your loss. As we in government have pursued the facts in this case, we have kept the men who died on that fateful day uppermost in our minds. And finally, I want to acknowledge the support from the U.S. Commerce Department's National Bureau of Standards, who provided the vital technical expertise essential to this investigation. Dr. Charles Culver, the Chief of the Structures Division of the National Bureau of Standards, will review the results of his studies later in this news conference. For some background, within hours after the collapse, OSHA investigators began one of the most extensive investigations in the agency's history. Our purpose had 3 components. 1, to determine the cause of the disaster. 2, to discover if federal safety standards had been violated, and to what extent, if any, those violations had contributed to the collapse. And 3rd, to assess responsibility for the accident. Our investigations have answered these questions, and I want to tell you what we found. We found serious disregard for basic, fundamental engineering practices, a factor directly related to the cause of the collapse. We found obvious and unacceptable design deficiencies in the concrete lifting system that could have been detected with rudimentary engineering analysis. We found that on 2 occasions prior to the April 23rd collapse, the lifting system had failed in virtually the same way that it did on the day of the accident at L Ambiance. We found that employers responsible for the system ignored these early warnings. We found a pattern of sloppy construction practices which may have influenced the progressive nature and speed of the collapse of the Twin Towers. We found also an overall sense of complacency among key employers for essential safety practices. As a result, early this morning, OSHA issued the stiffest penalties in its 16-year history by citing the major contractors and key subcontractors in this project with numerous willful and serious instances of violating the safety provisions of OSHA standards and the Occupational Safety and Health Act. The total proposed penalties are $5.11 million. In detail, TPMI Macomber, a joint venture company serving as the primary contractor and project manager, and Techstar Construction Company, the lifting subcontractor, were assessed nearly $5 million in the proposed penalties. Lift Frame Builders, a general contractor, was assessed a proposed penalty of $104,000, while two other subcontractors, Fairfield Testing Labs and Preforce Corporation, received penalties of $10,000 and $1,000 respectively. We believe that this is the appropriate response to the conditions that existed at the Bridgeport construction site. Furthermore, on October the 9th, we sent an alert to the two known lift slab operators, including Techstar, advising them to cease lifting operations until they could assure that each and every component of their lifting system conforms at least with a 2.5 times safety factor required by federal regulations, and until they can assure, by analysis conducted by a qualified engineer, that a localized failure of any lifting components would not precipitate a building collapse. In addition, OSHA will publish a notice in the Federal Register to reopen the public comment period on our proposed rule updating OSHA's concrete and masonry standards. This step has been taken in the interest of revisiting those sections that deal with lift slab construction and to assure the best possible worker protection.